So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. So my talk today will be about, as the title says, affine interval exchanges and dilation surfaces. Since I wasn't sure that you were very familiar with the geometric side of this history, let's say, I took some time to introduce the objects and everything, so quite gently. So I'm sorry for those who will think that it's maybe too slow, but I hope you won't be too bothered. So please feel free. I don't know. I'm not sure if I can ask it, but feel free to interrupt me if you have any question. Maybe I should have asked first to the organizers if I can receive questions during the talk. I don't know.
No problem.
No problem.
Okay, it's fine.
It's fine, but okay, no, it works. Okay. So so let me start with a definition. Actually, that will be one of the main characters of this talk. So an affine interval exchange is just a map from the circle to itself, or equivalently the interval, if you prefer. It will not change much, and which is bijective and piecewise bijective. Sorry, it's one-to-one in English, I think, and piecewise affine map. So this is just a definition, and I have illustrated it with an example. So here, here it is a common way, say, to represent such a map. So let me draw what the map does actually. So you're supposed to think that the bottom segment and the top segment are the two copies of the same interval, and thanks to the picture, I will give you what's the image of a point under the map F in question. So you start, let's say, on the bottom with a point X, okay, and you will just look at where X is projected on the top one, and you will map it accordingly to the pattern given by the colors and the dilation given by the colors. So here is, for example, this point. It will correspond to this point, and the map from the circle to itself is given by such a procedure. So it's just a way to let's say define an interval exchange. So if I insist a bit on this point, it's because it will be very much useful when we will go to the geometric side of the story. So is it clear so far how I've encoded, let's say, this piecewise bijective affine map? So I start from the bottom, I look at what's the color and the interval on the top, and I will stretch it or dilate it to the bottom one again to recover the map, the value of the application F. So I could have drawn the graph of the function as a F as well, but it's just the way I want to think of them from now. So if it's clear, I continue. Okay. So so now with this kind of representation, it's easy to see that an affine interval exchange that I will abbreviate it from now on IE, can be described completely by the interval combinatorics, the length of the intervals, and the dilation ratios of the intervals. So here in the example that I've shown you, here we have 4 intervals, a way to permute them. So here the permutation is 1 to 2, 2 to 1, 2, 3 to 4, and 4 to 3, meaning that the black one, so the red one is on the bottom, is on the top of the black one, and so on. So we've permuted the blacks and reds and blue and greens. So that's a combinatorial data of the interval exchange. We also have the length of the intervals that I denoted by lambda i's. So the first one is of length 1/6 and 1/3, 1/3, 1/6. So, and the latest set of numbers that I have to consider is the set of dilation ratios, which means by what amount you have dilated your intervals to glue them up together. So for example, this one, the first one, the black one, is dilated in this example by a factor 2 to the bottom one. So this is just to say actually that you have a very, let's say, standard parametrizations of interval exchanges by finitely many numbers and a combinatorial data, which is just the permutation, which gives you the interval exchange. So everything is to say that you have finitely many parameters. actually many parameters. And therefore you have a topology and a measure. Actually, it's not exactly a measure, but a class of a measure. Measure class. Measure class. On the set of all affine interval exchange. So you see me coming whenever you have such a structure on a set of dynamical systems, you want to understand what are the typical and generic properties of those dynamical systems. So maybe just before that, I will ask the question that that interests me. I would like just to be sure that you've understood my definitions of interval exchanges and what that kind of spectrum means. Is it clear? Okay.
Yes, it's clear.
Do you assume, so you assume that the partition at the top and at the bottom is the same?
What do you mean by the partition?
Okay, the length of the first interval
on
the top and on the bottom is the same.
Sorry, no, I do not. No, sorry. This example is a bit too particular actually, but I do not require anything on the length of the intervals on the. They do not have to match exactly on that kind of. I mean, I think what you. No, you can take whatever you want.
Okay.
But the space is the same.
No, it's not. I could have chosen, for example, this one maybe a bit, like this.
Yes, of course.
I think it was the question that I've been asked. Maybe I'm wrong, no? But I could have chosen something like this, and they do not match the way exactly the way it was before with this picture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Have I answered somehow your question?
So, did you fix the length, or at some point?
The length. I mean, this is a map F.
Yeah.
F is given by the length, yes, which is give. I mean, what exactly do you mean by?
So you have the top and the bottom intervals.
Yeah.
And you have a growth factor to expand.
Yeah.
But for the initial interval, do you fix the length or not?
No. It can be whatever.
Okay, you don't fix.
No. I mean, yes, I could have drawn something like this as well.
Okay.
No, sorry. No, it's not one fix, one third, one third, one sixth. Like, I mean, it can be everything you want. Okay. And I want to study all these maps. I mean, I think it was obvious maybe, but I want to study the dynamical properties of the maps given by such pictures, affine interval exchanges. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so what I try to say with this example is that you can parameterize actually the set of all these maps by finitely many real numbers. Okay. So in particular, it comes with a topology and a measure class. I'm just considering the one which is given by the parameterizations. Sorry. Okay. So all of this is just to say that I can ask to this very special class of maps, what are the generic behavior of those? Okay. And this is now the question that I will try to ask, that I will ask actually. So the general question is how those behave a typical affine interval exchange. And the answer actually, which is not a complete answer because it's still it's something that we don't know how to prove, but it is expected that there is a full measure, an open set of affine interval exchange that are dynamically trivial. So dynamically trivial, it means that any point will accumulate in the past, or almost any point, because you see in this picture, for example, there is a slight ambiguity on this point, but there is only finitely many of them. I don't care. I don't want to discuss them so much, okay? But this point, they can, there are discontinuity points that can be discontinuity points, and I don't want to. So up to this point, every orbit in the past and the future will accumulate on some attracting cycle. Okay, so this is what I mean by dynamically trivial. So the open set character, the openness of this is actually just the fact that we expect if you have a contracting map, for example, yeah. So this is a dynamical behavior which is stable under small perturbation. Okay, so having attracting periodic orbit is stable under small perturbation, and it's why this why this property is open, actually. But this is actually a theorem. I mean, this is not the, it is the important part of the question is the full measure aspect of the question. Okay, the openness is already known. Okay, sorry, I shouldn't maybe have pointed it. I mean, the real question is about the full measure of this application. Okay. So maybe is it clear, or do you have any question? I think okay. Okay. I'll ask often because I can't see you, so I'm always a bit that kind of online talks. So I prefer to be sure that everyone's following. Okay. So the way to address this question is actually a geometrical way, and we will introduce, in order to understand better this affine interval exchange, geometric objects, but that are somehow naturally associated to them and actually a bit more general. And that objects are dilation surfaces. So actually there is, I will keep it informal because I wasn't sure that you know very much the geometry. I mean, it involves a bit of non-trivial geometry, let's say, to define it properly. But there is an alternative definition that I decided to present here, which is a dilation surface. You can just think of an affine, of a polygon, maybe several polygons in the plane that you've glued together using only affine maps of the plane. So an affine map, let me recall, is a map on this kind, with A strictly positive and B any complex number. Okay. So maybe let me illustrate a bit this definition with some examples. So here you have a flat torus, okay, and so it is just a square. So in particular, it's a polygon of the plane, and we've glued this side with this one by the map Z, by the map which is a translation, and the bottom one to the top one by another translation. Okay. So in particular, it is a polygon of the plane that we've glued with respect to affine map, since they are translation. So a translation map is just a map with A equal to 1. So in this case, A equal to 1. So on the geometric side, you recover a flat torus, okay, which is a topological surface like this, like a donut. And I represented the two curves that are defined by the sides of the polygon here on the surface. So that's a very first example. And actually this example, it's we used to call them like they are translation surfaces. So it belongs to the class of translation surfaces because A equal to 1. So this class was very much more studied than the one of dilation surfaces. And yeah. So I will try to say a few words after on this class. So maybe another example here, slightly more complicated. So this is the two-room surface. So the gluing is given by the colors of the picture. So this one to this one. So this is a translation as well, okay, because this one has the same length than this one. The blue ones, it's a translation as well. But these two, the red and the black one, you have to use some ratio, some dilation ratio, because this one is shorter than this one. That's the same thing for the other one. And you recover when you glue all of them together, the sides of this polygon, you recover a surface of genus 2 with a singular point P. It is singular because if you compute the angle around this point P, you'll see that it's much larger than it is supposed to be. I mean, it's a 6 pi here. So you just have to count the number 4 pi, or pi over 4, sorry. But I will come back on this, but on a more maybe dynamical aspect. And the last example, which is not yet an example, is this one. And actually, this is not a polygon because I haven't closed it. It's not a polygon because there is nothing here. And I will do, and we make it a polygon now by closing it this way. So I hope that you remember that was actually the way that the way that I introduced you to the affine interval exchange with that kind of pictures, two intervals, bottom and top. And here I just decided to glue them up, the two intervals, and now I have a nice polygon, which is actually a square, but I don't want to think of it as a square. I want to think of a polygon, but slightly, you see, which is the bottom and the top, the two segments were divided by the length of the infine, by exactly the color that you can see in the picture. And now you can glue this polygon according to the colors of the pairing. So, and you will recover as well a surface, which is a dilation surface. So you see, to glue the sides of this polygon, I just use dilation maps, affine maps of the plane. Okay. And finally, I will close this one with this one, with a translation. So this defines me as well. Like from an interval exchange, I can define a dilation surface. Just looking at this way, this very special way that I represented it. So now you can see why these two objects will be eventually connected. And so there is something else to say about that class of geometric object. It is that I don't want actually to consider them all the polygons with all the glue-ins, but I would like to consider them up to cut and paste. So I will define this in a moment. I will come back on this in a moment. But first, so this is why. First, I would like to emphasize that with this geometric object, the dilation surface, it comes naturally directional foliations, meaning that you have a very natural dynamical system on the dilation surface. So for example, I will come back on the first example. So you just want to consider the foliation induced by the vertical direction. So here, maybe. So you see, this is a well-defined foliation because when you arrive on one side of the polygon, you will glue it with in this case a translation map, and the foliation is therefore well defined because the translation it will not I mean, it will glue. You have to look at what. Sorry. You have to look at. You have to look in charts if you know a bit of geometry to see that these foliations are well defined here from here. It's just because you have considered translation maps, and it's actually the same if you ask the transition maps, or the way that you have to glue your polygon not to be translation maps but dilation maps, affine maps. So for example, here the foliation, the vertical foliation, is given by this. Okay. And you can wonder how does it look on the surface. And here you can see that actually the point P here on the surface is a singular point, meaning that the foliation is not by straight line around this point, but it's by it is a saddle. Don't remember the name in English, but you can see, like, I mean, that kind of singularity that appears all the time. Okay. So basically, a dilation map, it comes a dilation surface. It comes naturally with a foliation, and a foliation which is defined by the polygons that you considered. So maybe the most important case for us is this one, because here you can see that the foliation, so it's the same thing, and it's actually So if you look at this interval here, the first return map on this interval is exactly the application F that I defined thanks to the first picture here. So you start from X, you follow the foliation, you arrive somewhere, and you will be glued here, and so you come back to this point. So the foliation F, the foliation of the defined by this geometric construction, totally encodes the affine interval exchange that I consider through the first return map on some definite interval cross section. So maybe is it clear so far what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Okay. Perfect. So all of this is to say that I want to study this set of maps, the affine interval exchange, but instead of studying them directly, I will study the set of all dilation surfaces. Okay, and you can recover the dynamical properties of the affine interval exchange by just taking cross sections of the foliations that you naturally have on dilation surfaces, and looking at the first return map, which is actually an affine interval exchange. So you have this kind of dictionary between dynamics and geometry, and now we work more on the geometric side of this thing. So maybe I should say a couple of words on this cut and paste operations, because here, for example, so here this is the very flat torus, okay, and the foliation is simply this one. The first return map in this case is identity, okay. We haven't done anything, but it's actually exactly the same here. So if you look at the foliation here, so you want to consider a point and to see where it goes. So it arrives here, goes back here, and this one is glued to this one. So it's exactly the same. The first return map of this polygon and this one is exactly the same, and dynamical properties are completely equivalent. And this is not a miracle. It's because you can obtain the left square from the right one by cutting this part and gluing it here. So you see, you just have changed the way you present your dilation surface somehow, because in the end, the surface, but I haven't told you exactly what's the geometric structure behind. But if you do it, if you glue actually these two polygons with the colors that appears in this picture, you will recover the same geometric object in the end. And this suggests that you should not consider all the polygons, but the polygons up to this cut and paste operation. Okay. So, I mean, if you don't understand all of it, that's not a problem, because I will not discuss it so much, that part of the thing. I will try to illustrate it as much as I can. Okay. So maybe, okay. Any question maybe, or is it clear? Okay.
It's okay.
Okay, maybe I wanted to say something here. Okay, now I will try to define the Teichmüller flow. So this is a geometric thing, and which is a flow on the set of all dilation surfaces. So if you want, it's a flow on the set of all polygons on the plane. From what I understood, you're more from the dynamical world. So this is actually the counterpart of the renormalization. If you want, the Rosevich induction. I don't know if you know it, but this is the geometric side of this Rosevich induction. So it's the Rosevich induction, but on the set of dilation surfaces. Okay. So it's just a geometric way to encode the renormalization. And so how do we define the Teichmüller flow? So that's something that's supposed to take a dilation surface, so a polygon of the plane that you've glued somehow, and to give you back another polygon. And this is actually very easy to define it, is you just take your initial polygon and you multiply it by the matrix exponential t, exponential minus t, 0, 0. So it stretches sorry, I think I've done it the other way around. No, it's good. Oh, no, it's good. So it stretches the vertical direction and it dilates the horizontal one. So for example, if you started with your square here, the image by the Teichmüller flow at time s is just this square which has been flattened by the flow by this matrix after some time t. Okay, and so this gives you an action on the set of all an action of R on the set of all dilation surfaces. And actually, it looks like it's completely trivial because if you have a polygon, you can look at the image of it by such a matrix and you will just recover something very thin, very long, whatever is the polygon at first. But don't forget that you have this cut and paste operation. And maybe you have very complicated way to custom paste back this very degenerate polygon to make it somehow normal. So that is not completely trivial because of this cut and paste operation that I mentioned before. So so here it's just an illustration, and it's not even an example of what kind of flow it is, this Teichmüller flow from restricted to the dilation torus. So dilation torus is just a torus as this one, for example. Oops, sorry, not this one. So it's just a square basically that you've glued with a phi map. But in this case, you can show that it's translation maps. So actually, you can show that this in this case, all the torus polygon, the polygons when glued together by affine maps give you back a torus, up to the cut and paste operations. This is exactly this quotient of two groups, so SL2R divided by SL2Z. So if you're not very familiar with group and stuff, that's not very important, but it's just a very nice orbifold. So I draw it here, okay? So it's the modular surface. And so this is a very canonical way of thinking of the set of all dilation torus. And so now you can wonder what is exactly the Teichmüller flow on this representation of the set of dilation torus. And it's nothing else than the geodesic flow for the natural metric that you have on the modular surface. So it's here I draw by the image. You have to think that this point here is a translation surface with this vector, and the dilation surface, sorry. And you look at the Teichmüller flow, it's just the geodesic flow in this parametrization. So maybe why have I introduced all that kind of stuff? Is to speak about this theorem, which is called the Mazur's criterion. And so it asserts that if you have a translation surface, so it's a dilation surface, but for which the polygon that you've considered is glued with translation maps instead of affine maps. So with A = 1, translation of the planes. So this is a more restrictive class of surfaces. But if you consider them all together, the set of all translation surface, you can look at an orbit of a given translation surface S by the Teichmüller flow. So it gives you a trajectory. And if this orbit is recurrent, meaning that it comes back infinitely often in a given compact of the set in the set of all translation surfaces, then the foliation given by the translation by your polygon, the translation surface, is uniquely ergodic. And its unique ergodic measure is the Lebesgue measure. So in this case, for example, the case of the torus. So if you consider a flat torus, which is a translation surface, the vertical direction here, the first map here is just a rotation of a certain angle, okay? And basically what this theorem asserts is that you know that if alpha is not rational, then the foliation, the rotation is uniquely ergodic, so the foliation is uniquely ergodic. And what it says is that if you look at the trajectory here of the geodesic flow, so this surface is supposed to be with the foliation, is supposed to be this point and this vector. You look at this dynamical behavior on the set on all translation surfaces, and if it comes back infinitely so often somewhere, then the foliation that you were investigating at first, this one, on this very special surface, is uniquely ergodic. So this is I mean, it's a very beautiful, theorem, which is not very hard to prove, by the way, but still, it's very nice, I think, to try to recover dynamical properties of a given dynamical system, like the foliation given by this translation surface, by looking at the behavior of the dilation surface on the set of all dilation surface. Like, but I mean, you're probably familiar with it since I've heard a lot of renormalization procedure so far this afternoon. So I guess that's not completely new to you. So now I will come back not on the case. I will come back to the case of not translation surface, but to the case of dilation surfaces. So this was just more to introduce you to the objects and the way of thinking of that aspect. So is it any question, or are there any questions? Is it clear at least a bit?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I continue.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. I can. I mean, as you can see, I have my my tablet, so I can explain more. You just have to ask.
It's fantastic.
The tablet.
Yes, I like.
Very nice tool. Very nice tool indeed. So now I'll conclude this presentation by just speaking a bit of what we are doing at the moment. With donc this is a work in this is first a work in progress because it's not completely written, not completely done yet. With Selim Ghazouani, which may be here because is it here? I can't look at the chat. Can I? 27. Gazou? Ah, si. Okay. Selim Ghazouani and Guillaume Tahar. Who is in Israel, and Selim Ghazouani, who is in Orsay this year. And so the theorem that we think we have a proof for is that for all dilation surface there is a dense set of directions. So by this I will precise a bit what we mean by this, that carry a periodic orbit. So you have you have to think of this this torus. What we prove in this in the translation case, the case of the torus. So here we have for example, sorry. So this direction, okay, the foliation which is given by the vertical direction here, it's completely periodic. So in particular, we have a periodic orbit in this direction. But the theorem asserts that actually, in the case of the torus, whenever you take a rational direction, you have a periodic orbit. So there is a dense set of directions which carry a periodic orbit in this case. And our theorem says that that's the same thing for dilation surface in general, I mean. So for example, the two surfaces that I've shown you before. So, so yeah, is the statement clear? Or so on the set of affine interval exchange, it means somehow that most of the interval exchange have periodic orbits in this sense. But I should comment that this theorem is not at all satisfying from the measure perspective side. I mean, it's just something topological. We have a dense set of directions for all dilation surface, okay, but just a dense set of direction, and we are not able to say anything about the fact that we have a full measure set of dilation surface and directions, which corresponds to the full measure set of affine interval exchange map from the very first question that I stated. Okay, so the statement is clear. Can I continue?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, I think, yeah. Maybe I should have maybe said something at this point on the work which was already known on that kind of on dilation surfaces and a fine interval exchange. So before this, there is this very general theorem of Peixoto in the 60s, but which does not directly address the case of dilation surfaces, which is something more general, like about foliation on surfaces, and it's something which, for example, it's not a theorem from which addresses the finitely many dimension. How do you say it? Parameter space. The specificity of our setting is that you have only a finitely many dimension to parameterize the set of all interval exchanges, which is not the case of Peixoto theorems. And the most the most common work was Isabelle Liu's PhD thesis, I think in the 90s, and who has shown that for that there is a dense and open set of more. Yeah, no, but it's a bit too technical. But there is not so many work before this one. So not much to say. So now I'll try to discuss the proof of this theorem very briefly, and just trying to use that kind of ideas that, I mean, this Mazur's criterion idea. And I will try to not to use, it's not the same kind of things because they are not renormalizable, most of these interval exchange, affine interval exchanges. But this geometric way of trying to say something on the question. So the ingredient of the proof. So first, the main tool that we use is the fact that for dilation surfaces, we have a very natural way to triangulate them. And this is given by the Delaunay triangulation. And this I will really, I have no, I can't even try to define it because I should have introduced before the geometric structure more precisely maybe. But you have to think that it's a very natural way to triangulate surface, which does not depend on the way you consider your polygon, meaning which does not depend on the cut and paste. So for example, we've seen before that this polygon and this polygon shares the same dynamical properties. The vertical foliation shares the same dynamical properties. So we would like to say that these are the same things. And the Delaunay triangulation will actually give you the same triangulation for this object, and even this one. So these three polygons are the same in the set of all polygons up to cut and paste. And the Delaunay triangulation is somehow an invariant of this of the geometric structure which underlying these three polygons. So that's something which definitely sees the dynamical properties of your first Roton map, because it does not depend on the way you represent it with polygons, for example. So okay, so now that we have this nice triangulation of our polygons, of our dilation surfaces, we would like to define that a sequence of dilation surfaces degenerates if at least one of the Delaunay triangles, so you have a triangulation, you have all the triangles, and if at least one of them, if one of them degenerates, then we say that the surface degenerates. So what could it be for a triangle to degenerate, for an affine triangle? So affine triangle that are just a triangle like this, but up to a affine transformation. So for example, you can always, since it's up to affine transformation, suppose that the largest side of the triangle is 1. You can always suppose this. So when you see something like this, a triangle with a largest side equal to 1, a very natural way to say that it degenerates is to say that it will shrink into a flat triangle like this. Okay. So this is what I mean by when I say if one of the Delaunay triangle degenerates. It means like it shrinks when you scale it at size 1. So, and now you have this, yes, a sequence of dilation surfaces. So you have a sequence of triangulations. And if one of these triangles degenerates, we say that the sequence of dilation surfaces degenerates. So here, for example, I draw a sequence of degenerating dilation surfaces. So we start with this S0, the square, and now we flatten it, and the Delaunay triangulation is actually given by two triangles which are very much more stretched than the two that you have originally. If you continue, meaning like if you keep stretching the surface, you will see very, very thin and long triangles, and this is exactly what we mean by degenerating. So in this setting, GT, so this was actually the Teichmüller flow, and this is a exponential t exponential minus t 0, 0, 0. So I represent actually the some steps of the Teichmüller flow applied to this square dilation surface. Okay. So now the strategy of the proof, of our proof, it goes by induction of the number of triangles that we have in a dilation surface. So it's a proof by induction. So we start with a dilation surface of complexity, which means that dilation surface whose corresponding Delaunay triangulations has at most p, where p is an integer, triangles. So we start with such a surface, and now we would like to make it degenerate. And so there is a first lemma. There is a direction. Forget about this story of direction, but you can use the Teichmüller flow to make the surface you were thinking of to degenerate. Okay, so you will find a sequence of time. So just applying this matrix, this matrix to the polygon, and you will be able to find a sequence of times such that the surface actually degenerates. So this is a sequence of polygons that degenerates. So this is the first thing to do. And now the heart of the proof is the following proposition, which says that if you have a degenerating sequence of dilation surface, either it has a periodic orbit for n large enough, meaning that if you have this sequence of dilation surface, you will find some integer such that after this dilation surface has a periodic orbit, the foliation has a periodic orbit. Or if it is not the case, the surface, there is a subsequence actually which converges toward a simpler dilation surface. So the hard part here is not simpler because as I told you, our definition itself of degenerating implies that you will shrink a triangle. So if it converges, it is clear that it will be simpler in the sense that you will have killed at least one triangle. But what's more intricate actually is the convergence part. And actually it's not exactly a convergence. We have to look at a bigger class of dilation surface to make it converge into some nice and larger set. But so I'm sorry, but I can't enter into the details. Maybe if you have questions, I can try to answer them. And so I'll stop here for the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, Adrian, thank you very much. So it's time for questions.